Hey, we're alive. Okay. Sorry, everyone watching on Facebook. Thank you for waiting. We are now both on Facebook and YouTube. So, hello, everyone. Okay, sorry. Just checking that we are actually on both. I can see myself, so that's always a good sign. Welcome to our Springbank virtual tasting. I am Cara and I work in the sales and marketing team at Springbank. But I have actually been off for since the end of March now. Because of coronavirus, the distillery and all the operations have been shut down. So I've had a nice long holiday, managed to get myself a suntan in sunny Campbelltown. So yeah, feel free to start with your first whiskey. I have already started with our first whiskey tonight because it took a little bit longer getting it all ready. So we've got our Hazelburn 10-year-old tonight. This is our triple distilled and unpeated whiskey that we make at Springbank. And it's about 10% of our yearly production. This one is mainly matured in bourbon casks, so it's kind of a light Irish style whiskey is what we were going for. So feel free while we're here tonight to send me some questions on the chat, and we'll do our best to run through them and read them. This is my first virtual tasting. As I said, we've been kind of incognito at Springbank, just because of we're following government advice and keeping all of our staff off on furlough, which is a government paid scheme where they pay 80% of our wages, and the company Springbank has been paying the extra 20%, which has been really helpful for all of us through this time. So we're in a very fortunate position to be working for Springbank and getting 100% of our pay, where many other people in the UK at the moment are not in such a fortunate position. So yeah, we're very happy, but it's nice to come back and actually do a tasting. My poor boyfriend has just been listening to me talk about whiskey for the last 2 months, and I think he needs a break from that. So I've escaped to the office, which I've not been in for 2 months, 3 months nearly, which is the haven of all Springbank decisions, and where all the whiskey is getting tasted first. So lots of little sample bottles in the back corner there on this side, which is where it kind of all starts from. Someone says it's always sunny in Campbelltown. Not true, but this isn't my first rodeo. But there has been a nice sunny spell in Campbelltown recently. I think people come for the festival in May, which is normally our best time of weather, and they think it's like this all the time, but it's unfortunately not always as sunny as we would hope it to be. But so I'm sure many of you have tried our first whiskey tonight before, if you're big fans of Springbank. Now we produce 3 different types of spirit at Springbank. Springbank spirit, obviously, which is 2.5 times distilled and slightly peated. We'll go into the 2.5 times distilled a little bit later on, but for the Hazelburn, as I said, triple distilled and unpeated. Now the Hazelburn spirit we actually only started distilling in 1997, so it's only been 23 years on the market, so we don't actually have a lot of older Hazelburn, and the 10-year-old is kind of our standard product, one of the only standard products that we put out of Hazelburn really. And then we also have a Hazelburn Sherrywood, which we'll put out once a year, which will be a very small batch, maybe 9,000 bottles, 12,000 bottles. Can vary from year to year depending on how much we made 12 or 13, 14 years ago. So yeah, but this one kind of, I think, signifies for me what we wanted from Hazelburn. It was Frank McCarty who was head of production at that time, and he came to work for Springbank from Bushmills, and kind of brought that triple distillation method over from Ireland, and introduced this new style to Campbelltown, and I think it works really well with the bourbon casks, that nice lighter kind of maltiness as well. Always quite nice and honey, but it's not, it doesn't fall away. It's still got plenty of character and kick to it as well. So it's not a palate cleanser, if you get what I mean, but no, it's gorgeous. So I see there's a few people who are here for the first time. There's definitely some people who I know, the very familiar faces. My sister did say to me tonight, if it goes wrong, don't worry, it's just people in Holland that will be seeing you. But I see there's many people from Scotland and elsewhere. She thought I could just never return to Holland and that would be fine. But unfortunately the internet does not work like that. So it's nice to see all you guys kind of tuning in, and it's nice to see that the whiskey club, the group of lovely people that you meet all around the world come and find you online as well. I have myself been watching lots of online tastings and participating in a few since I've not been getting to do it for my job as much. But at the same time, I'm very sad not to be in Holland in person tonight. I was there at the beginning of the year for a whiskey festival and had a lot of fun. But we'll make it through. I'll come back eventually, and once the coronavirus subsides, and we'll get back over for sure. Well, I finished my first whiskey, unfortunately. So I think we'll move on to number 2. Dirk is typing. We might have a question in the mist. Yeah, so yeah, it's a very nice mild whiskey. We call this the breakfast whiskey, the Hazelburn, the first one, and it's a nice little starter to go for. Shilton, I see that you're mentioning me in a comment, but I can't read it just now. Here we go. So bourbon casks, someone's just asked what bourbon casks we use. Now, we don't have a specific bourbon distillery that we work with, so you can see lots of different types coming through the distillery, and it completely depends on what the cask company that we buy for kind of sells to us at the time. You know, we always try and get the highest quality of casks as possible, but we don't have a specific bourbon distillery that we stick with. So it's quite nice. You get a little bit of batch variation, I guess, as well with all of our Springbank products. All of our kind of batches of even Hazelburn 10, which is a standard kind of yearly release. You probably will see slight differences from year or batch per batch, which we might do 2 batches every year. And yeah, that just depends on the casks, and we've got 8 different warehouses at the distillery as well. 6 of them racked, 2 of them racked, and 6 of them dunnage warehouses. And I always find the dunnage warehouse maturation, especially when it comes straight out of the cask, you've got this really kind of earthiness, that kind of dunnage smell to it as well. And with these smaller batches that you get with Springbank, just due to the smaller quantity of whiskey that we make, yeah, I think you do find it, this batch variation, a lot more. Edwin, you want to know how you can enrol in the job? Who knows? I think be good at talking. That's thing number one. Being in Campbelltown, living in Campbelltown helps. We employ about 95 employees, all of which live in Campbelltown, so it's quite strange, not all the time, but for certainly the bigger companies, to find that their sales team and sales and marketing all live near the distillery. Quite often they're outsourced to kind of the cities if they're up north, just due to it being easier to get them to travel there. If we are, when we back in the day when we did go travelling to do tastings in person, it takes around 3 hours to drive from Campbelltown to Glasgow Airport, and then from there on you have to go elsewhere. That's a one thing as well with me missing out my trip to Holland, is that I am going to miss out on my KLM points, because quite often all of the flights from Glasgow, you have to go via Amsterdam, by Schiphol Airport. John, no, there's no ferry. Well, there is a ferry, but it's not very kind of efficient. It's about 3 hours to Ardrossan and on the ferry, and then you have to get a train or drive from there to Glasgow, which is about 30 minutes as well. So there's a big carbon footprint on our whiskey tonight. Yeah, there is a lot of carbon footprint on this whiskey, for sure. But everything at the distillery is quite environmentally friendly. And then Shelton, maybe you should move to Campbelltown. I'm sure they would love you here. You'd fit right in. So yeah, well, the way I got my job, if you're very interested in a job, is I asked for a kind of summer job, and then I went off to uni to finish my last year, and then Ranald called me up one day with a job offer. So it wasn't the most difficult, kind of the right time, right place, I think, is the way to do it. And I also did the whiskey school when I was 17, which might have put me a shoe in as well. I'm from the area and near Campbelltown, small island called Gia, and went to Campbelltown Grammar School. And the distillery offers places to do kind of work apprenticeships at the distillery. It's kind of changed since when I was in school, but at that time it was, you basically joined in the whiskey school, which is a week full of fun for anyone who doesn't know about it. The whiskey school, basically you can come to Campbelltown for the week, give us a little bit of money for your food and board, and work very hard for us, and get to see the whole process at the Springbank distillery and how the whiskey's made. But you do, a lot of blood, sweat and tears is made in that week of work that you'll have to do for us. But basically that I did that when I was 17 as part of kind of work experience, and that's where my interest sparked, and then obviously how I went on to get part-time jobs here, and then eventually in the position that I am in now. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, or maybe not. It's maybe not the most helpful, but we can see. So yeah, now I have moved on to whiskey number 2. We've got the Springbank 10-year-old. This is our kind of flagship, I would say. Lovely bright orange colours will always stand out in the bar. So Springbank is the spirit that we have been producing for the longest. We were established in 1828, and we're not sure of exactly how the 2.5 times distillation process came to be. And it probably wasn't at the very start, but it may have been. But yeah, so this is the namesake of what we do here. Now, with everything that we do with Springbank, we've got our core range, and each has its own little recipe. With the 10-year-old, it's always 40% bourbon casks, 60%, the other way around, 60% bourbon casks, 40% sherry casks. And we'll vat them together about 12 months before it's going to be bottled. And we have that 12-month period for the marrying period. And it gives the chance for the whiskey to get to know each other. And it just kind of sits in a dormant cask for the last 12 months of its maturation, so it doesn't get added anything else. But we'll have vatted it together, both the bourbon and the sherry, before. So this one's a big favourite. I think this is the one that people ask more and more of, which you think is not the usual way of kind of other distilleries. It's often the more exclusive ones, and kind of single casks or older age statements that are always screaming out for more. But I think that's what's so amazing about the Springbank 10-year-old and kind of all of our core range, or the younger core range, is that they're just as popular as these more novel whiskies that release as well. So yeah, just to go into the half distillation, someone's asking about that. Basically, with the regular whiskey, or most whiskies in the industry that don't state otherwise, they'll be double distilled. So we have 3 stills at Springbank, 1 wash still and 2 spirit stills. Now, for the first 2 distillations of Springbank Spirit, it'll just go through the wash still, and then go through the spirit still, and we'll collect all of the kind of faints from that, and all the spirit from that second distillation. And basically, through the 3rd distillation, we'll take a selection of your low wines, which came out of the first distillation, the product from the wash still, and then marry that together with some of the faints which have came from the second distillation. So that kind of mix that goes through the 3rd distillation, what you're looking at, the product of that, is that some of the spirit in there has been through 2 distillations and some of it has been through 3. So it's probably some dodgy maths, but we're not very particular about anything. 2.5 is good enough for us. But it makes some amazing whiskey, and I don't think I'll ever, or have ever, tried anything quite like the Springbank Spirit when it comes straight off of the still. It's just so vibrant and fruity. And who knows if that's to do with the distillation method, or the fact of we've got a very long fermentation time in kind of wooden washbacks, or perhaps it's the fact that we 100% malt our own barley. It's a little bit of a Springbank mystery. I think it's just all of it combined together that makes it work. So yeah, Springbank 10, it's always a winner. Now, everything in our core range that we will release yearly as a standard product will be bottled at 46%, mainly because we like to drink whiskey that's a little bit of higher ABV. But also, you will find sometimes that if you get a bottle of Hazelburn, Springbank or Long Row and it's a little bit cold outside, that'll be cloudy inside the bottle. The liquid can be a little cloudy, and this is because we don't chill filter our whiskey. The way I like to describe chill filtration is if you like your milk semi-skinned or full fat, and at Springbank we like it full fat. So chill filtration will kind of pull out some of these fatty oils from the whiskey, and because we don't do that, when the fatty oils get a bit colder, then that's where you see the cloudiness in the whiskey. However, if you just warm it up to the kind of room temperature, that will disappear. But that is one of the reasons as to why we bottle everything at 46% ABV as well. Having it at higher strength kind of slows down that cloudiness that you might get when the temperature of the room gets a bit colder. So yeah, a little fun fact. So I briefly touched on Springbank's, the fact that we do 100% of our own traditional floor maltings here. Now this is something we are eager to get back to work on. As everyone's been off furlough, production's been stopped at the distillery for a few months now, and it would be good to get the guys back in production. But it's pretty hard labour, and the guys are probably thankful for our rest at the moment, not being at work, especially since the weather's been so lovely recently. Because doing this kind of traditional floor malting, you're dealing with the elements of kind of the sun and the cold, whatever gets thrown at you. And that's why Scotland's very appropriate to do traditional floor maltings, because it generally is just a medium okay tepid temperature. But in the summer, the guys are always working very hard in the malt barns to grub and turn the floor. Normally about every 2 hours when the heat gets up, like it has been recently. And it's pretty hard labour, so they're very grateful, I'm sure, to get a little rest. But I've seen most of them out just walking around in the shop and out and about for walks, and I think they're still quite eager to get back, because they love what they do, and it saves them from going to the gym as well, keeps them nice and healthy. Someone's saying they hope they bring back marrying strength bottles. Richard, marrying strength? Oh, you mean like cask strength? Well, the third whiskey tonight is cask strength, and we do our special editions in cask strength most of the time, or if we feel that the whiskey kind of is better at cask strength. Sometimes, especially going to other countries, the price tag on high ABVs can be pretty high, and sometimes it's not required as well. Sometimes the whiskey does, to me personally, taste a bit better at the 46%, but then sometimes it goes the other way, and I wish you the public could taste the marrying strength as well. But yeah. There we go. So yeah, that's another thing, that we would be currently in the midst of probably our 5th week of our Springbank Whisky School. So if anyone is watching that had managed to get a place on this year's Whisky School, I am very sorry that we couldn't see you this year, and we'll hopefully get to see you again next year. If anyone's interested in coming to the Whisky School, I think it's 5 or 6 year wait. Mary Patterson, who works in kind of organising all these events, is always grateful for another email. I'm sure she'll appreciate me saying that. But it's always good to have, we do have quite a long waiting list, but it's good fun to get onto the Whisky School and actually come and see where the whisky is made and who it's made by. Many of the guys that work for us here have worked here for about 30 years, straight out of school, and started making whisky at Springbank. So they're true knowledgeable guys. So definitely sign up if you can. Dirk was typing there, but nothing in there. Here we go. And for me, the favourite part of the Whisky School is doing the malting. I think you get to truly see how much more difficult it is to do these traditional floor maltings, and how much you have to unnecessarily shovel barley around the building. How things could be moved a lot easier if we gave into efficiency and instead got rid of the shovels and started using kind of machinery to move it around. Strength bottles. Okay. People are referring to marrying strength bottles that you can find in the shop. Are you talking about the kind of casks? We do have casks in the Campbelltown shop, which you can come in and get. I can hear someone downstairs. Yeah, that you can come and get, like, kind of fill your own little bottle. I'm not too sure what you're on about, the marrying strength 10-year-old. Or perhaps the cage bottles. So here in the Campbelltown shop, we do something special for those who manage to make it all the way to Campbelltown, because we appreciate it's a very far journey to get down here. And we have cage bottles. Now, these cage bottles are essentially one of one. You won't be able to find anything like it anywhere else. What we do is the guys at the distillery will, every month or so, whenever we need them, we'll go and collect a 70cl bottle of a random sample out of a cask and just handwrite what they've taken from. So perhaps it's a port cask, 14-year-old Springbank, and then they'll check the ABV, pay the duty on that and bring it down to the shop. And these are pretty special, and you don't get to try them before you buy them, so it's a bit of a lucky dip. But with Springbank, it's never too much of a risk. They're always pretty good, and it's actually a nice chance to get to see some really different and rare whiskies that we don't get. I've, for example, got a Springbank Rumwood 9-year-old, I think, at home from the cage, which I thought would be quite interesting to try. And Springbank and rum casks go very well. If anyone had the chance to try the 15-year-old Rumwood that we released in September last year, I think they would also agree. Just nice and light and floral, and works very well. So yeah. So if you are coming to Campbelltown, and I think that's maybe what a few of you are referring to, is these cage bottles, nice special one-off bottles, which occasionally, when we're allowed to go travelling, we do bring out to try, and see them. But so on very rare occasion. Okay. Okay, Richard's saying none of what I've said is correct. Yeah, I'm not too sure about these marrying strength 12-year-olds or 10-year-old Springbanks. I'm sure they've been around. I think over the time of Springbank they've done everything, and you quite often find that people know a lot more about them than myself, which is, I always welcome it. It's good to hear what has happened in the past. 1828 is a long past, long history. So if you've got a bottle of that, crack it open, or send it my way. I'll happily try it, test it, make sure it's okay for you. Great bottlings. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, so we have got the Malts Festival, which was missed this year. Was anyone going to come to the Malts Festival in May and unfortunately missed out? David's invited me to the next tasting. I'm looking forward to that. Scott, I know. Edwin, yeah. Yeah, so the festival, personally, I was very upset that it was not happening this year. We had a great time last year and the year before that, and we had some very special tastings lined up, and we're kind of hoping to get something online. We're not sure of anything concrete yet. As I said, we're still all of the staff are still off work due to coronavirus, and we don't follow in government UK or the Scottish government kind of guidance on that. We don't plan to open until we're in about phase 3 or 4, which looks like probably August time until we open up again. So we'll know a little bit more about that, and what we're going to do with the festival when it gets to that time. And we can see that. Oh, I'm getting offered to post the Stallions lockdown tasting. The Springbank Stallions named themselves the Stallions, which I think is a very appropriate name. Have invited me to one of their tastings, but I think you'll need to invite the whole group now. We can't discriminate. Okay, so got a question here. You're wondering if Springbank has changed throughout time. Honestly, you can taste older Springbanks. Probably the oldest one I've tried was from like 1966. So undoubtedly, yes, it has changed over time. How, I can't give you an exact answer, but you definitely can see a slight change, which is kind of expected, I suppose, over time. But also a little bit strange as we haven't changed much else. We haven't changed location. It's still in family ownership, so I suppose you would wonder as to why it has changed. But a few little things, I suppose, over time. But you can definitely see some difference throughout time, but I think you can see difference as well throughout each expression of Springbank. You do get that kind of Springbankiness through all of them, but each cask maturation is different. Again, each kind of cask producer is different as well. You know, if the bourbon industry has changed their methods over time and their different casks, or that all kind of contributes to that as well. So the answer is yes, but how, I do not know. I suppose as change is inevitable, I suppose, at some point. Someone's mentioned Buckfast on here. I don't suggest it's a good one to bring with. Just bring a Springbank 10 instead, I would suggest. Okay, I'm ready to move on to whiskey number 3. I'm sure many of you have already moved on, but so we'll go with that. So our third whiskey tonight, Springbank 12. This is the release that we did in January of this year. So it's the most recent release, and we will do a Springbank 12 release twice a year. People come and ask, this is series 20, batch 20, there we go, Whiskybase batch 20. Unfortunately, if you come up to anyone in the Springbank sales team and say, what do you think about batch 20 or batch 15 or 16 or whatever of the Springbank 12-year-old, will have no idea what we're on about. We release 2 a year, and we go with that, which can get quite confusing because each of them have got different ABVs, and as Whiskybase says, they are all good. Now with the cask strength, this was probably one of the whiskies that I loved when I first started at Springbank. It's really nice and powerful, it's got a kick to it, and for a few years ago it was probably a little bit more sherry heavy. It was about probably 70% sherry casks and 30% bourbon. The last 2 releases, including the one that we have tonight, are the other way around, but 65% of them are bourbon casks and 35% sherry, which works really well. It's still got this really good powerful punch to it, but yeah, a little bit lighter on the sherry, but I think works really well. Can't get a bad Springbank. So yeah. So a little bit of history about Campbelltown and Springbank, talking about how things have changed over time. So Springbank was established 1828 by John Mitchell, and today is still owned by the Mitchell family. His great-great-grandson, Mr. Headley Wright, still owns the company, and may that continue. Which gives us a lot of free rein to do whatever we want. Really, being a kind of independent distillery gives a lot of freedom in that regard of what we release, and I think that's why you see these little small limited releases, like last year with the Springbank Rumwood. We found a few casks of Springbank Rumwood and tasted it, and it was ready to go, and then it went. So it's quite an easy decision to make for us, and nothing is kind of slowed down by going through the levels of who says what. So yeah, it's nice to still be in that kind of ownership and have that freedom within our jobs. But Springbank back then, back in 1828, was just one of many. And Springbank spirit or whiskey was sold mainly to the big blending companies back then. That was kind of where most of the whiskey went. And that's because most of the whiskey in Campbelltown was also going with it. Campbelltown is in the west coast of Scotland, at the very bottom of the Kintyre Peninsula, and has this beautiful wide loch that kind of faces towards Glasgow, and is perfect for shipping things to Glasgow. So back in the 1820s, when the most kind of useful form of transport was shipping, Campbelltown was the ideal area for shipping lots of whiskey to go into the big blends up in Glasgow, be blended, and then from Glasgow go to America and all across the UK and wherever else it required to go. And at that time in the 1820s, Campbelltown had over 30 legal distilleries operating. So it was really kind of the whiskey capital of the world back then. Many of the distillers at that time, like John Mitchell, as I said, was a farmer, and they were farmers, or they were distillers because they had the grain there and obviously liked a little drink, so it only made sense. But these distilleries, if you are going to come to Campbelltown once the coronavirus things settle down, you'll see that the town is still awash with the history of all these distilleries, even 200 years on. And the local supermarket, for example, still has the old pagoda roof that one of the distilleries, Loch End Distillery, used to have. The bus station, you can still see the distillery kind of engravings where the front of the distillery used to be. So it's really part of our history here, and I think what we're trying to do with Springbank and what we continue to do with Springbank, I suppose, is to keep that history alive and that tradition of how the whiskey was made, and keep it in its purest form, and not get too carried away with the new and efficient machinery. We much prefer the old style, which is easy to fix but breaks often. I think is maybe the way the guys in production would put it. So yeah. But I think that's my favourite thing about living in Campbelltown, as well as seeing all these old buildings, and even the houses, which were all these grand houses that kind of surround the loch, were built with money from these distilleries. And it's kind of really in the DNA of Campbelltown, and it's nice to kind of work to try and keep that history alive, and maybe one day we'll have 30 distilleries here again, as providing that you all drink the whiskey. Does anyone have any thoughts on older Springbank 12-year-old releases? Oh, I've had an update on my my fireman. Before we started tonight, the fire alarm was going on and off. It was kind of beeping. I think the battery was running low. But Grant, who many of you will know from the UK, he works as a sales manager for the UK. He also doubles as our fireman, and he's here to check out, to check we're all safe and there's no beeping anymore. So yeah, the 12-year-old, big, strong, kind of got like this Iberica ham, a little bit peppery as well. Kind of got a big, powerful whiskey, which is always nice. Yeah. So this one, more so than any of them, you'll definitely see batch variation with the older cask strength 12-year-olds. And some people prefer the more sherry heavy, and some people prefer the kind of bourbon side of things. I think bourbon with Springbank works really well. And I kind of prefer the other side of the tip, but I'm not too fussy. Sean, I don't think Grant's going to be able to throw you over his shoulder anytime soon. No offence. Yeah, Richard, lots of kind of that oily taste. I always get that oiliness with Springbank as well. Who knows why? I think, especially with the long row as well, that younger long row, you get that kind of oiliness. And I don't know if it's maybe from the peat, and the 2.5 distillation as well, I think gives you that kind of depth and oily feel to it as well. You don't maybe get the oily feeling as much with Hazelburn all the time, but definitely in your Springbanks and long rows, for sure. Good one. Okay, shall we move on to whiskey number 4? This one's quite interesting, and big kind of winner with all the Springbank fans is the Springbank Local Barley. Now this is something special that we'll do once a year. The one that we've got tonight was released last year in 2019, about September, October time, and what we've got here is same spirit but made with local barley instead. So this particular one, the barley came from High Cattledale Farm, and it was Optic was the barley type. Now for many years we have used Concerto, so most of the whiskey that's on the market just now has been made with Concerto kind of type of grain, but with local barley, all the barley is grown in either Campbelltown or very near Campbelltown, so maybe Machrihanish or Southend, which are little kind of towns, villages more so, maybe 10 miles away from Campbelltown itself, so not far away. This one, the local barley was from a farm in Southend, and I think what's interesting with the local barleys is that you get to kind of introduce yourself to the argument of whether the different grain types change the whiskey, which I think, in a simple answer, in my opinion, yes. I do think you can see some variation from different strains of barley going through to the whiskey. In terms of production, we do see a difference in the making of the local barley. When we get the barley in from local farmers, due to it being grown on the west coast instead of the east coast of Scotland, which is where we get the barley for the rest of our whiskey, you do find that for one, the grain is smaller when it's grown on the west coast, and quite often it's a lot harder to work with as well. The farmers locally are more often used to being kind of dairy farmers, cattle farmers, and don't grow a lot of barley themselves, and generally we'll just have to ask them to grow it specially for us that year if they're up for it and they get some free whiskey in a few years' time, and obviously paid for the grain as well. It's not a trade for trade, but growing barley on the west coast does present its own challenges. A lot more rain on the west coast of Scotland than you'll find on the east coast, and you find that this causes some problems with the size of the grain as well, or not problems, but you do get a smaller barley grain, which means you get less whiskey at the end of it as well. If you've got a smaller grain, you'll end up with less whiskey at the end. The local barleys have been kind of going around. Well, the very famous one was the 1966 local barley. So we've kind of done them on and off. But for the last 5 years, we've released a local barley. And every year it will kind of change in cask maturation. It's not always the same. And the ages will change as well. So the local barley 9-year-old Yorn, which you're mentioning, was I think the year before, and the 16 was perhaps 2017 or 2018. So no, the local barley 10-year-old was from 2019, and we shall, when we're up and running, have another local barley after that. I think they're a great kind of series as well, and really kind of speaks to what we do at Springbank as well, and try and create as many jobs in Campbelltown as possible and really contribute to the economy in Campbelltown by having our staff all working and living in here, and that's kind of one of our main goals. Some of you know already the cask maturation, but this one for this year, the local barley was 77% bourbon, 20% sherry, and 3% port, which probably equates to about one port cask, which I think you can kind of taste in there slightly. It's got that kind of roundness, that berries richness in there as well. I always think these little 3% of cask maturation are very funny. It's generally just one cask, and Finlay, our head of production, currently will do a little vatting and see what it tastes like, which is always a really interesting part of the job for me, is to see how these vattings are kind of created, and fortunately getting to try some of them before they're released onto the market and getting first dibs, which I'm sure many of you are jealous of, and the main reason you want a job at Springbank. So this one was 9,000 bottles, and that would have been one batch of barley. So we'll do 1 week of local barley every year. Now when it comes in from the farmers in either Southend or Campbelltown or Machrihanish, it will be, they're not used to kind of selling barley to distilleries, so it will generally be higher kind of moisture content than we'd be looking to store it in. We'll get it a few months before we're actually going to malt it and work with it. So we don't want it to start germinating before we want it to germinate, basically. So what we'll do is we'll put it into the kiln first when we first get it, and dry it off to about 15% moisture, and that means that it can sit up in the loft until we're ready to actually put it through the malting process. We'll also find that there's a lot of stalks, and it's quite a rough grain when it comes off when we get it from the farmers, so it will need to be kind of reworked. So it's a lot of hard work that goes into the local barley as well. Hold on. Here we go. So David Carson, I'm off furlough for one day to do this tasting. As I was supposed to be in Holland this week, Whiskybase had put this kind of proposal to us that we could do an online tasting. I thought it was a great idea, so I didn't want to let you guys down and not do it. So I'm off furlough for a day, and then I go back on it tomorrow. So no one apart from a few of kind of the Ranald and Stuart, our finance manager, and head of HR are actually working at the moment for Springbank. So we're not all off work, but most of the company is at the moment. So yeah, there we go. A lot of questions about the cask maturation. 77% bourbon, 20% sherry, 3% port. Sean has it on there. If you're on YouTube, I can see his comment there. So yeah. So next, local barley bottling. We are, I don't actually know for sure yet. We've not tried it yet. It should have been vatted probably about now. So we'll do our vattings probably about 6 months before it's going to be bottled. 6 to 12 months. So that is what the guys in production would be busy doing at the moment. But unfortunately we're a little bit behind schedule because of coronavirus. So we're not really sure yet. It'll be of similar fashion, I would say. More bourbon maturation than sherry. And there may be a little bit of port, you never know, might be rum next time, but I don't imagine the vatting has been done yet, and if so, it's top secret Finlay Ross knowledge. But once we get back in hopefully August, when we're back to work, we should know a little bit more about all these questions, and hopefully get to come online and do some more tastings and get you guys involved in that as well. Providing that you would like to come and see us. I think it's quite interesting the situation that we're in now with coronavirus. Is we're going to see a change, I think, in the whisky industry and how we do things, especially for the rest of 2020. I can't imagine I'll be seeing any of you at whisky festivals or even tastings around the world. So I can imagine I'll be talking to my computer for a little bit longer. So I'll need to get used to it. But it'll be interesting if you have some thoughts of how you would like to see the industry kind of develop from this. I don't know if you like sitting at home drinking whiskey as much as doing it at a pub somewhere. Yeah, so Bram, the Cadenheads in the courtyard, I don't know if any of you, if you're all familiar with it, but last September we did similar to, it was like a baby Campbelltown Malts Festival with Cadenheads. And Cadenheads is our independent bottler, which Springbank also owns, and they basically will buy casks from different distilleries, maybe re-rack them into different casks and age them until we think they're fit for human consumption, or when they're at their best. And we did a little open day for that, and we called it Cad Heads in the Courtyard, with some tastings, and they do rums and cognacs as well with Cad Heads. So it's not all about whiskey, but it's mainly all about whiskey, and it was really good fun. So that was planned for let me see my calendar, sometime in September. It was planned for September. Now, if we can go ahead, if the Scottish Government say that it's safe to go ahead, and we feel that we won't be doing any damage to the community in Campbelltown and risking their, vulnerable and livelihoods as well, we will hope to go ahead with it. But we're kind of waiting to see what happens with coronavirus and how that situation develops as well. So once we're back to work, and it'll probably be, you'll find out in August or so if that's going to go ahead. So yeah. And if that does go ahead, we would hope to put in some Springbank tastings and maybe some Kilkerran tastings as well, added on to that little event. If not, we shall see you online and through the computer. So yeah. So, live is better. I think live is good. I'm quite enjoying getting all your feedback and comments through. It's sometimes it's difficult to see all the comments running through, especially when my sister's trying to make plans with me as well. And you get a little bit distracted. But let's move on to dram number 5, I think. Let's go. We've got the Cracker, the Longrow 21. There you go. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous whiskey. This was also released last year in the end of 2019. Here we go. So, Longrow is our heavily peated and double distilled whiskey. Now, we started distilling Longrow in 1973, but it's always been very low production wise, and it equates to about 10% of our yearly production as well. So you've got 10% of it's Hazelburn, 10% is Longrow, and the other 80% would be Springbank. It's a general estimate of how we go through things. So only last year really do we have enough stock to continue to release the Longrow 21-year-old every year from now on. So I am pleased to announce that it will be again released this year. There was only about 600 or 3,600 bottles released of this one. So it's very small output, but we do have enough kind of in the storage to go from year on year now. As well as releasing, our Longrow 18-year-old that we release every year, our Longrow peated, which doesn't have an age statement on, and is our only whiskey really, at Springbank that doesn't have an age statement on it. And the reason that we don't put many non-age statements out is because of our owner, Mr. Wright. He believes that whiskey should have some integrity for the customer, and they should know exactly what they're getting in the bottle, and not be worried that it's just a 4-year-old whiskey that they're paying 80, 90 euros for. So that's the only one that we don't have on there, and the reason that we don't have an age statement on the Longrow peated, the kind of standard release of that, is because Longrow is our heavily peated whiskey, or our peated as much as we can whiskey, and to keep that peat in, that flavour profile in the whiskey, it's we have to age it for not too long. So everything with Longrow peated is between 7 and 15 years old. This one obviously that we're drinking tonight is 21-year-old full maturation. We've got some bourbon and sherry in there, but the majority, as you can smell really, of the casks is kind of refill sherry casks. It's got that lovely rich kind of meaty taste to it in there. But that's why I've done it this way round, because long row, as it ages, that the peat phenols start to kind of dissipate over time. So we've done it the way round where we'll do the 17-year-old single cask at the end. And it's always a nice little boost to finish on a single cask as well. And for those who don't live in Holland as well, it'll be interesting to see that single cask, since you won't have had the opportunity to buy it or see it in shops really, unless you have, and then you have magical ways of working the whiskey industry. There you go. So another question. So we don't have any plans to put, had a question if we've got any plans to put a 14-year-old long row into the core range. We don't have any plans at the moment. The core range of long row at the moment, and kind of for the foreseeable, will be long row peated, which is our non-age statement, the 18-year-old, the 21-year-old, and our long row red release that we do every year. For those who aren't familiar with the long row reds, these are an amazing kind of series that we do, and basically it's where we will mature long row for various numbers of years. Most of them are kind of between 12, 13, 14, and we'll mature maybe in 3 years of that in red wine casks. Now the red wine casks does change. I think that it's just a case of serendipity of where the next wine casks are picked from. It generally is one of the sales team will be out drinking one night, find a guy who owns a vineyard, they'll promise some wine to them to be sent to the office, and then the casks arrive a few weeks later. That's maybe not exactly how it happens, but it's how I imagine it to happen. So yeah, it's always interesting. The most recent release of Long Row Red was the Chilean Merlot. That was really good. 13-year-old, I think. It's been so long since I've worked, I can't remember all the whiskies that we do. So yeah, so there won't be any 14-year-old with Long Row as a standard release. Yeah, this is a gorgeous dram. So, David is asking if someone who loves Springbank but is off the peat, or aff the peat, there's so little peat on Long Row 21. I would say Springbank, if you don't like peat, or you don't really, you're not really, if you're new to whiskey and haven't kind of discovered your love for peated whiskies yet, I would not be afraid of anything that we produce. Hazelburn obviously is kind of your first go-to if you're not drinking anything with peat smoke in it. But Springbank is so mellow and so well balanced that it's not so much just that peat flavour you get in it, it's more of a gentle smokiness that you would get in kind of a flavour profile from anything else, like smoked bacon or Iberica ham, or it's a really kind of gentle smoke to it, I think, all the time. Never get this really medicinal flavour to it. And that's also where you would maybe kind of put down to it, is that we get our peat from up north, actually. So we've got a farmer up north near Tom and Tubble, and kind of another producer of peat near Inverness, and they bring down our peat for all of our whiskies. The farmer in Tom and Tubble brings down all the wet peat, he just digs it near his farm, and due to the different kind of land makeup in the north of Scotland compared to what we're used to with peat smoke, which you'll maybe find in an Islay whiskey, where you get that medicinal, salty brininess. The stuff from Inverness and up north doesn't have that same medicinal flavour to it. It's a much more gentle smoke, more of a toasted marshmallows or kind of smoked meats kind of flavour to it, I think. There you go. Let's see what it's got. Yeah, I love the Long Road 21, and I'm happy to see that it will be continuing into the yearly release. So yeah, shall we move on to our last whiskey of the evening? There we go. I've not tried this one since we released it actually, so it will be interesting to try. But everyone's in anticipation for it. So this is our Long Row 17-year-old single cask for the Dutch market. Now, we have a very small number of casks available for single casks. Basically, most of our whiskey that we make is already written off and spoken for years in advance. Finlay, head of production, he has got upon spreadsheet planning out where each cask of whiskey will be in the future, and only a very small list of things that are kind of unspoken for, and that's probably where the single cask list comes into play. So this one I think was released in sometime in 2019, September time I think, maybe August. Single cask, 17 years old, matured in Oloroso sherry casks, or cask, just the one. And I still have, this is the original sample. So this was kind of one of the first single casks that I put out to one of my markets when I started in the sales job. And for me, it's amazing. Long Road can stand up to these big sherry casks. Some people will find it a bit sulphury, but that kind of Springbank funk, it works with that big sherry cask as well. So I don't find anything bad about it at all. Here we go. Well, an interesting question from James. Are you maturing Springbank Spirit in any ex-Kilkerran casks yet? We may be. I don't know. To me, I think that's a great idea. An interesting one. It'd be interesting to see how that kind of comes out actually. Springbank and Kilkerran. Kilkerran is our other whiskey brand, made in Glengyle Distillery, which is also owned by kind of Janie Mitchell, and we've only been producing at Kilkerran for 16 years, so it'd be interesting to see how Springbank and Kilkerran match together. In terms of peat level, the barley for Kilkerran and Springbank are the exact same. We traditionally floor malt the barley for Kilkerran as well, and we dry it for 6 hours with peat smoke like we do with Springbank. So the barley starts the same, and it's just really the stills, the distillation methods that is different. So I do find some similarities between Springbank and Kilkerran, and it's kind of interesting to see how that would work out in a cask maturation. So yeah, maybe we maybe do is the answer to that. Yeah, so even with this one, you're not getting a big hit of smoke. It's there in the background with this single cask, but it's not overpowering. There we go. Oh, I'm getting trolled. I don't agree about it standing up to sulphur casks. Well, that's what I love about whiskey, is that it's all kind of all subjective, isn't it? Really, we all have different flavour profiles, and I like to leave the tasting to everyone else, and I can't tell you what you taste, or what you enjoy. So I'm happy to take that. If you feel like the sulfur is maybe a little bit too much, totally understand that. That's fine. But yeah, that's what I like about a single cask as well. You kind of see that variation from being in a different warehouse or whatever, and just the slightest of differences. It can be from the same year, it can be the sister cask from the same bodega, and it will be completely different because it's been put in warehouse 3 instead of warehouse 6, which I think is amazing how 100 metres of difference can completely change the maturation on a whiskey. So yeah. Are there more Hazelburn single casks on the way? There may be. We do have a few Hazelburn single casks, or there's a few Hazelburns on the list. They're not spoken for anything yet, but yeah, possibly. We'll see after we get back to lockdown, if we're doing some more single casks. They're always a nice little change, but you'll never see lots and lots of single casks from Springbank, purely because we don't have the volume of whiskey. So yeah, I always think it'll be interesting when we get to 2030 and the sales team, if I still have my job, we'll be looking back at 2020 and we'll be going, why don't we have enough whiskey for this year to sell? And it'll all be because of coronavirus. So there might be some special bottlings for coronavirus in the future. But again, for us as a company, it's all about kind of sticking to the Scottish Government guidelines and keeping Campbelltown safe, and kind of looking after all of our employees while doing that. So yeah, so I'll probably go into the core range. Once lockdown ends, priority will go back onto our already planned schedule. So we'll start the year again and produce as much as we possibly can until the end of the year. We're in a fortunate position where we're very used to working with little stock at Springbank, so we'll manage to make through and make it eke out in some places. Who knows, we might have to work weekends. We might, well, if we have to work weekends, I don't know what we'll do. I can't imagine we'll be made to. David Carson. So David's asked, we've done a Spirit of Freedom. Now the Spirit of Freedom bottling was to do with the election on Brexit, the vote to come out of the European Union, and we did a Spirit of Freedom to kind of show our support towards the exit, or the staying side. But I can't imagine we'll do a Spirit of Lockdown. No, I can't imagine that. We might do. Who knows what happens in 10 years? Anything could happen. There you go. So, how have we enjoyed this evening? I know I have. It's nice to actually sit down and have a proper whiskey tasting. Do we have any final questions before we end the evening? And I go get some pasta for dinner. Yeah, thank you for all coming in to see me. I can't say it's not been a little bit strange speaking to a computer for an hour and a half, but I think it's something I can get used to, for sure. So I hope to see you all at many more tastings in the future, and have some further debates on the whiskey and kind of more questions about it as well. there's so much to talk about with Springbank, with such a long history, that you know, I could spend hours and hours on here, but I shall let you get back to your drinking whiskey. Don't let the night end. I know for sure. I have some half full bottles left here, so I might have a little dram after this. But yeah, thank you so much and good night. Okay, hopefully see you out on the road again soon. Okay, bye guys.